Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. I think most of us will still be recovering from a 1-1 draw for Norwich City against Oxford United on Friday, but the Canaries are straight back in action tomorrow night when they take on Sheffield Wednesday, and of course a huge game for their playoff hopes, which at the moment feel like they are quite ambitious, but of course plenty of the Championship season left, and we know how quickly things can change in the second division. So here on Tactics Board, I'm going to take you through my predicted 11 for the game, the team that I think Johannes Hoff-Torp will choose for the game. Then we're going to come on to Sheffield Wednesday, how they play, how it might pan out against the tactics that Norwich will try to deploy. And then I'm going to speak about the goalkeeper debate, because with Angus Gunn injured, and it feels likely that he misses this one as well, there's a choice now between Vicente Reyes and George Long for Torp. So we're going to look at that, some of the elements going into that decision and who's likely to play tomorrow night. But we're going to start with that predicted starting 11. So without further ado, here it is. So I've gone for George Long in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, Kenny McLean, Emiliano Marcondes and Jacob Wright in the middle of midfield, with Ante Sienats on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. Now, obviously, a few changes in there, and of course, the injuries and fitness issues come into that. Probably important to say that I'm recording this before this afternoon's press conference when Torrent will update on all of those fitness issues and the players who have obviously missed games in recent weeks. That will decide a lot of it. But we saw Kenny McLean come back as a substitute in that draw with Oxford. Marcondes has now obviously been introduced in the last two games, so it feels like they could be in a position to start. And I think with some of the midfield problems that Norwich have had, that would make sense. Obviously, they went with Anis Ben Slimane, Jakob Sorensen and Jacob Wright in midfield in the Oxford game, and it just didn't really feel like there was that drive there, that purpose, that urgency maybe to do things. I thought Wright had a good amount of that, and I thought it was actually a good performance from him, by far his best in a yellow and green shirt for me. But Sorensen was just a bit too pedestrian, didn't really take any risks with his passes whatsoever, seemed to be looking for the central defenders first when he got the ball, didn't do it particularly quickly either, so it sort of slowed things down. And I think Slimane over the last few weeks has been entrusted with that more creative role, obviously since Marcondes has been out with that hip injury, but he hasn't really lived up to expectations, I don't think. There's still a player there, and I think you can still see the technical quality that he has, the sort of build that allows him to assert himself physically, but he just hasn't produced that consistency. He's been losing the ball a lot, and that really isn't what you need in that Torp system. So I think maybe it's time for Sorensen and Slimane to step out of that starting lineup, and given the options available to Torp, it feels like it will make sense that he goes for his captain, Kenny McLean, and Marcondes, who got the assist, of course, in that Blackburn game about, 9 days ago now. And also somebody who I think he's been able to rely on in a creative sense for most of the season. So I can see those midfield changes. As far as the back four, obviously Shane Duffy he said 20 minutes late due to, obviously he arrived late, but also there was a crash that he said he got stuck behind on the way to Carrow Road, and that was why he was left out of the starting lineup for the game against Oxford. But hopefully no issues on the roads tomorrow night, and he is there on time, because that would feel like quite a lot more of a balanced back four. Duffy back in there, and then you have the left back as a left footer, which I think is always a huge advantage whenever you watch a right-footed left back. And this really isn't a problem with Jack Stacey or his performance, but it just doesn't work in that position, at least in my view. So I think to have Doyle back out there will be much better, and we'll come on to why it's particularly pertinent in this Sheffield Wednesday game. But I think him there, and then Cordoba and and Duffy in their more rightful positions makes a bit more sense for Norwich. So hopefully no problems there, and that's the back four that Torup can go for. And then I think that front three is really coming into its own at the moment. Obviously, it would have been good to have Lewis Dobbin available. We'll see what happens with him at the end of the season. Matej Jurasek obviously still struggling with that thigh injury as well. So there aren't really many options for Torup to choose from. But actually, I think the last few performances from Seaman have been much better. I think the goal against Blackburn and the way that he took it will have given him confidence. And it just felt like he did things with a lot more conviction. In the Oxford game, there's one move that I think we see quite often where he fires it into Josh Sargent's path. Sargent either holds it up or lays it off first time, and Seaman then follows the ball into that central area. And I think if you can get him on the edge of the box, more central rather than sort of isolated out wide, I think that's where he can cause damage. We saw one fierce shot from distance that tested the goalkeeper in that game on Friday night, and we've seen a few times where he's actually made pretty good decisions, played some decent passes, and it just hasn't quite come off from that number 10 position. So I think if you can get him into those areas, that will cause Sheffield Wednesday problems. And with his performances in recent weeks, they feel like they're headed in the right direction. As far as the rest of the team, we will come on to that Reyes versus Long debate and why I think Torup might err towards the latter. But before that, we're going to come on to Sheffield Wednesday and some of their strengths. So I think most people will have seen how Danny Royal's team set up when they beat Norwich 2-0 earlier in the season. Of course, it was an injury-hit team, even more so than it currently is. Also a place where Norwich always seem to struggle to go. And on I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday night, in a run of tough games where Norwich just really weren't at it. They made a lot of mistakes. And a lot of the things that the Owls exploited them with on that occasion, well, could work again this time. They press very high, so they'll be able to disrupt the way that Norwich play out. They're quite intense. They go direct first time. And actually, that was something that Duffy and Cordoba really struggled with. But I think with some more time together as a pairing and with some really good performances that Cordoba's produced over the last few weeks, they may be better set up to deal with that. Sheffield Wednesday do move the ball quite quickly. They have their players very spaced out, whereas Norwich at times get people close so that they can dominate numerically in areas. Wednesday aren't quite as bothered about that. They're bothered about finding space and having those longer passes that can get them up the pitch quickly. That means they play a lot of balls in behind early as well, so there will be a lot of chasing back for Cordoba in particular to do. But I think we've seen in recent games how good he can be at that. And if Norwich can get him higher up the pitch, that means they can press as well, as we spoke about a lot in the last episode of Tactics Board. So that will be a key part of it. I think something that might work quite well for Norwich. And actually, Sheffield Wednesday are very good at adapting. So you never know that this is exactly what they're going to do. But they've tended to press quite narrowly, particularly in that, well, their final third in the area that Norwich will be trying to build up in. And that's great news when you've got Callum Doyle at left back, because they tend to limit the options to playing out to the fullbacks early. And of course, in a lot of scenarios, that's quite smart because you have the almost invisible opponent of the, well, it's not invisible, but you have the non-human opponent of the touchline where there's not really much space to go. And then if you can isolate that fullback, they're easier to press. They don't have as many passing options. And if it wasn't Callum Doyle out there, then that probably would be a problem for Norwich. But if they can get the ball to the best ball player in their team by some distance early, then he's probably more likely than maybe every single Championship fullback to find a good pass from that position. It will be easier for Norwich to get him on the ball. He'll be able to make those passes more often, and that should mean more incisions into the Sheffield Wednesday defence, deep into the pitch, and getting Josh Sargent hopefully on the ball a little bit easier. So that is something that could go in Norwich's favour. But again, Sheffield Wednesday and Danny Royal, they are really, really good at adapting. So it might be something that they notice. They might say, okay, Doyle is likely to play left back in this scenario and press slightly less narrow. But again, if they adapt from what they usually do, then you'd hope there will be more opportunity for Norwich to exploit that, because they won't be quite as effective at it as they are at that narrow press, which does work very effectively for them most of the time. So that will be an interesting part of the game. Of course, lots for Norwich to consider, and they are teams who have been sort of on a similar trajectory this season, so it should be quite a tight one. But at Carrow Road, I'm sure they'll back themselves to produce a decent result. Now on to the goalkeeping debate, and of course you'll all have seen the news on Friday night that Angus Gunn was out of the game with a hamstring injury. Now, no real timeline on that from Torup in his post-match press conference, but it feels unlikely with that sort of injury that he will be able to feature probably this side of the international break. But I'd say certainly this side of Sheffield Wednesday. There could be a very positive debate at the press conference that I referenced earlier, but it feels like it will be a choice between Vicente Reyes, who of course made his debut for the club against Oxford, and George Long, who was out with a concussion but should be back for this one. And tactically, I think it's almost a different debate to what it is behind the scenes and with the intangible elements that go into it, because I think for Torup's system, Reyes probably is quite a lot better. There has been a lot of work going into Long and improving his distribution, and there weren't really too many errors in that sense when he had a run in the team earlier in the season, which actually included the reverse fixture. But he still doesn't have that level of sort of effective distribution that really gets Norwich's attacks going. Maybe doesn't have the same sort of nerve that Gunn does, because Gunn doesn't really play really progressive passes high up the pitch, but he can hold on to it for a bit longer until he's pressed and then release the ball, eliminating someone or maybe one or two players from that press. So there are issues in possession. I think the area tactically and technically where Long probably has the edge over Reyes is in terms of the collecting crosses. I think there was one example quite early on against Oxford where a ball comes in, it bounces in the 6-yard box or at least close, and you'd like to see Reyes come and collect it, but he doesn't do that. No real danger because there was nobody in the area, but that's probably somewhere Reyes can improve, and with the sorts of set pieces that Sheffield Wednesday can produce, that could be a problem for Reyes, although I actually thought from corners and from throw-ins aside from the goal that Oxford scored, which I didn't think actually he could really do much about. I thought he was okay, but with those balls into the box and with presence in the area maybe not being his strength, that's where I think Long has a minor advantage. But technically and tactically, I'd say probably Reyes does suit this Norwich system a little bit better. We saw some cool, calm work in possession, didn't distribute into the midfield every time, but did it a couple of times, which Torup was happy with post-match. But I think aside from the tactics, we have to also consider some of the dressing room elements. The fact that George Long has been told he's the second choice all season long. He's been waiting for an opportunity ever since that last run in the team. And for him to be told, you have to miss out because of this goalkeeper who's several years younger than you, has only played one game for the club, I think would be disappointing. And he's, by all accounts, a very good character in the dressing room. I can't see him kicking up a fuss, but given he was given a new 3-year contract earlier in the season, he will be around for the long haul. He might be somebody who you want to keep happy. Of course, he's homegrown as well, and if Gunn does leave in the summer, then there will be slots to fill in that sense. Of course, Reyes doesn't fit into the homegrown quota right now, so it's a bit of a difficult one as far as squad building and how that works for Norwich. You really want Long around the building in that sense. So I think there are some more intangibles that go in Long's favour, and there's also the fact that Torup has deferred to him in every previous occasion. Even when he's made mistakes, there have been calls for other third goalkeepers to come into the team. Archie Mayer was somebody people wanted to see gain minutes earlier in the season, and he didn't get any of them. So it does feel like Long is sort of the first choice of the reserve goalkeepers at the moment. But there is also an opportunity for Torup to say, well, Reyes made no mistakes. He was pretty decent against Oxford. There's not much of a choice that he has. So it could be a manageable situation. But I think given how things have gone previously, Torup might just go with Long. But it is quite a marginal call, so I may well be proven wrong. And I think if you ask the fan base, that's probably what they would like. So it'll be interesting to see what Torup chooses, or who Torup chooses in between the sticks against Sheffield Wednesday. And there are plenty of other interesting elements going into it that, of course, we'll have covered over at pinkun.com. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe if you haven't already, and you'll have access to all of our analysis, opinion, coverage, of course, all of your usual match day stuff tomorrow as well. So I will see you then, and hopefully we're all feeling very positive in the next episode of Tactics Board. Thanks very much for joining me, and I will see you then.